We've been exploring the idea of joy and happiness, looking at it from the perspective of the Christian, looking at the from the perspective of a Buddhist, and also what science has to say and what non-believers have to say about this as well. Christians believe that our greatest joy is when we seek to do good for others. So we ourselves become joyful when we reach out to others, when we try to do good to them, when we try to help them. Uh, for example, when we can't interact with other people, when we're isolated, we kind of shrivel. Part of us isn't able to really thrive anymore because we're just so isolated. We saw this, of course, during the pandemic. When we were forced indoors, people were like, "Oh my goodness, can I just see people?" Even drive-by visits, drive-by birthday celebrations, all of that. We didn't want to spread this virus, which at this point we didn't know how dangerous it was, how rapidly it could spread. There were no vaccines, there was no way to curb it. Dead bodies piling up, people were beside themselves. They felt isolation. They could not experience joy and happiness. We even had some people who would be out on their windows in cities and they would be singing or playing their instruments and just to try to share something with other people. People made videos, people did Zoom, people, all sorts of ways of somehow trying to stay in touch with others. A great example of this shriveling up when we are isolated would be a person who is in solitary confinement. Even there have been studies that show that this is such an inhumane treatment that it should be severely limited. Sometimes in prisons it seems to be used too much as a punishment. Certainly in some situations one would have to where the person is disruptive even in a prison and fighting with others and doing all sorts of crazy stuff and really out of control. Maybe with deep psychological issues that they haven't found a cure for or solution to kind of curb it a bit. So solitary confinement might be called for, but the thought of maybe it being overused in terms of punishment and what that can do to an individual, being in solitary confinement for a long, extended period of time, for years even, this punishment can be really terrible and do awful damage to a person. One of the amazing concepts that South Africa is noted for, and many uh, various tribes in Africa really embrace, called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is that concept where a person truly becomes a person through other persons, through their contact with others, through the way they build up community, by the way they care for others. So Ubuntu is a very powerful concept that really seems to be embraced by various tribes and peoples that really speaks to us about the importance of relating to others, helping others, being involved with others, building a sense of community. A typical example of that is, well, we need two people to bring us into the world. It can't be done just by one. A woman can't do it by herself, even in terms of, donor sperm. You need another person. And a man can't do it by himself. Uh, you need the two people. You need community. We even see it, of course, in the doctrine of the Trinity, the Christian doctrine, that even in God there is community. There are three persons in one God. The book of Genesis, for example, God says quite clearly in the beginning, in terms of the creation of man and woman, Adam, in the story, of course, is created first, and then God looks at that and says, well, it's not good for a man to be alone. So it isn't good for us to be alone. We need others, community. We can't be by ourselves. And you can never really develop the trust of others if you are thinking how to exploit them and how to take advantage of them. That initial trust that we are given, it's a great gift. People see us, they get to know us, and they say, this person is trustworthy. I can share this information with them. I can tell them some of my issues here that I am having. I can ask them for help. I trust them. But as soon as we become exploited or taken advantage of by another person, that trust withers away. And you say, well, this person gave me their word, they went back on it, they're not a trustworthy person. So that sense of being a person for others, being a person who is involved in the community, being a person who is helping other people, really kind of essential in terms of our Christian faith. When we are able to move beyond our own pain and suffering, then we become more available to others. Naturally, of course, we all have our own difficulties, our own challenges that we confront in our lives, situations that can harm us, difficulties that we can find, that we get mired in, and it can be a real challenge for us to go beyond them. But when we do that, when we move beyond the fact that we are in pain, that we are in suffering, and then we become then more available to others, and even our pain and suffering becomes an instrument of compassion and understanding, because we know that other people are going through that pain and suffering, and so we can relate to them who are experiencing of pain and suffering and share that with them, share that bond. And sometimes even in just the simple sharing, well, I went through a similar experience. It creates a bond. People who, for example, have experienced breast cancer, they're able to reach out to others. They move beyond their pain, their suffering. They're dealing with this terrible illness and the side effects of therapies. They're able then to help others and to reach out to others. And this is brought out also in the psychiatric literature. Howard Cutler, the Harvard psychiatrist, studies people in terms of their degrees of happiness. And through his studies, he's found that unhappy people tend to be the most self-focused. They can't get outside of this idea of focusing on their own situation. So they become very unhappy. So this kind of teaches us the importance of reaching out to others, the importance of creating community, to have this experience of joy and happiness.